Hey mushroom friends, it's Anna McHugh. I'm sitting in front of an enormous and beautiful fruiting of Amanita section Caesareae, stirps, Hemibapha. The best common name that I can assign to this is the slender Caesar's mushroom. And I will unpack this lengthy sort of scientific name. It is not a specific species name, it just gets me to a general vicinity of what this mushroom is. That said, Amanita section Caesareae, stirps, Hemibapha, and other mushrooms in Amanita section Caesareae are edible and desirable. The most popular and iconic of them is Amanita jacksonii, and this bears like every bit of resemblance to that mushroom, but for one feature that I can see with my eyeballs. And when I say see with my eyeballs, like there's a lot of research in this area happening. I just got myself an Amanita book from Jay Justice and Britt Bunyard, and I've been diving into that, but there's also a lot of really active folks doing research in the Southeast on Amanita section Caesareae. So as I am wont to do, I follow it like sports ball. I'm very excited to learn more about Amanita section Caesareae, but I'm going to share what I know so that you feel confident identifying these mushrooms yourself. So these are mushrooms in the Amanita genus. I would be irresponsible if I did not mention that the Amanita genus contains some very, very toxic mushrooms. So Amanita basically is split up into a number of different species sections, and those sections contain species that share common characteristics. So section Caesareae is really brightly colored. It additionally has what's called a volvate sac, or basically a nice, neat cup of tissue at the base of the stem. And you have a cap and stem mushroom very frequently with yellowy gills. Not universally, some of them are whitish. But the reason I mention this is that throughout the other sections of genus Amanita, primarily the gills are white. And so a lot of times if you're a beginner, avoiding white-gilled mushrooms is an effort to avoid Amanita mushrooms, because we have some really, really poisonous ones, and the really poisonous ones are white-gilled primarily. So, Amanita section Caesareae is very common and very distinct, and, is definitely, from an edibility perspective, really, a lot of people pursue them, and they're tasty. But it's also very important to learn to identify Amanitas as a genus if you are just getting started with mushroom hunting. All right, so, all the quasi-scary stuff aside, I'm going to talk to you about this, specific species section and how to identify it. And so, first of all, as with all Amanitas, you're looking at a cap and stem mushroom. It's really, in this case, very handsome. The thing that makes Amanita section Caesareae also really distinct is that it has this very, very nice cup of tissue at the base. Now, there are other Amanitas, including poisonous ones, that have this particular type of base, but a lot of the other brightly colored Amanitas that are this red and yellow color, they don't have this situation at the base. And so this is a really good feature. It's it's very distinct. It's kind of cottony. Let me see if I can find a really good one to show you. So when you pop the mushroom up, it'll just come up on its own, and you have these nice sort of clean split lines. So essentially, if you open it up, you can see that the mushroom and its stem is totally distinct from this nice cup of tissue at the base, and thick and cottony, very, very nice. Okay, so in addition to that, again, you have a mushroom that is in tones of sort of vermilion to bright red to yellowy sort of amber brown. So these right here I would call on the sort of sunburst, sunrise type of color range. And oftentimes you have a little bit of variability in terms of the pigmentation. So you often have a darker area in the middle and it lightens toward the edge of the cap, but that's not always the case. You also, in most cases of, these mushrooms, the striation is really, really noticeable. So striation is just these stripey grooves that run, around the margin of the stem. You also typically have, not always, but most of the time, have an umbo, so a little bit of a raised area in the middle. Sometimes it's like a little divot down and then a little raise up. So that's, another thing that you can very frequently see. And then additionally, you've got a ring on the stem that comes from a partial veil. So this is basically, and I'll show you one in a second, protects the baby mushroom's gills, and as it matures, it breaks. And it leaves a really nice, fluffy ring on the stem that also has a little bit of a, almost like square, just a little... I don't know, it comes out a little bit. It doesn't just go flush from the stem out. So there's almost like a little ring that helps it sort of stay distinct and pretty like this. This oftentimes, will start to fade, or in this case has been, eaten by bugs. So you want to be mindful always with mushrooms. It's like, especially with things like rings and, material at the base of the stem, it's really important to gather the whole specimen and to also look for signs of bug damage, and just be aware sometimes life happens to mushrooms very, very fast, and so sometimes you can lose these features. This is actually, I think, when I am the most interested in eating mushrooms in Amanita section Caesareae, is when they're young. These are also one of the few types of mushrooms that I will eat raw and that other people eat raw, and I just slice them very thin, and I put a little bit of I kind of do them as like a little snack. So I slice them up and I put a little bit of olive oil and some salt, and then just kind of snack on them. But they do well in other applications as well. But I'm a big fan of mushrooms when the gills are nice and tightly packed, and so babies really suit that purpose. And ultimately, sometimes it's great to find them when they're completely inside of their little egg, and you chop them open, and it's really just this tightly packed little Caesar's mushroom for you to enjoy. But this is a really good example of what they look like when they're small, and you still have this very distinct difference between stem and cap. All right, so I do want to talk about Amanita jacksonii momentarily, and sort of Amanita section Caesareae stirps Hemibapha. So what Amanita section Caesareae stirps Hemibapha means, in essence, is we are in section Amanita, as we have already discussed. We are in section Caesareae, and so that means these particular, the mushrooms that share these features that I just shared with you, around coloration, this ring, or universal veil. You have a ring on the stem, oftentimes, I think always, maybe striated, and again, these like orangey colors, which are pretty unusual for, not completely unique, but unusual for Amanita. You have a lot of pale ones. So that's Amanita section Caesareae. Stirps, I have no idea what that means. But it's basically like stirps parallels to, or sort of points in the direction of, Hemibapha. And I guess there is a species called Amanita Hemibapha from Southeast Asia that looks a lot like these mushrooms. And so I'm not entirely sure, again, about stirps and what that means, and if that is going to remain the best nomenclature for these mushrooms going forward. So like yesterday I posted a photo of one of these, and it stirred up a great deal of debate around which one specifically it is, and also what features are really determinate for the different species within this species section. One thing I do want to point out about these particular ones that is interesting is that they have really pale, well, at least one of these individuals, because I think I've got figure 8 of sort of orangey yellow gilled ones, and then the swoop that goes down to the creek is much lighter in color, and I'm not entirely sure. I can't really tell the difference between them. So that in a nutshell is Amanita section Caesareae. Amanita jacksonii, the one that is probably the most well documented in books. It looks almost exactly like this. The only thing that's different is it has these sort of orangey reddish scales or chevrons on the stem, and so you have a mushroom that is nice, big, tall, has all these features, but then with some ornamentation on your stem there. So that's what I have to say about those. I do want to share just a couple of other species with you, because it feels like it would be irresponsible on such a wonderful mushroom day to just talk about Amanita section Caesareae, but I can't understate how wonderful this fruiting is to see. You know, when you see mushrooms marching in lines and troops, that usually is indicative of the perimeter of the mycelium, and so it really reinforces that this, mycorrhizal mutualist that is growing with these oak trees is really quite large, and the mushrooms are but an ephemeral biological expression of a much more elaborate and interesting organism. All right, so next up, I'm looking at a car that thought about coming and looking at me. We'll see what happens. That was a suspiciously looking at me suspiciously kind of car. Anyway, okay, so I'm gonna hurry this up. I have a really cool red pored bolete to share with you. They're really interesting, and I can't identify this species. I just want to show you the oxidization on this. So it's a two-toned bolete that you have, and boletes are defined by having sort of a spongy undersurface. Here's a really good example of a spongy undersurface of a large bolete. This is Boletus separans, and if I manage to get to that before I get asked to leave, we'll talk about that one. But this is a really beautiful red pored bolete. I would not deign to identify it for the purposes of eating it, but I do want to show you a lot of these boletes contain xerochromic or variegatic acid. When it oxidizes, so when it comes into contact with oxygen, you get a blue staining reaction. And so I love to cut mushrooms that have a blue staining reaction that is rapid. And that really is also a very helpful identification feature for boletes, is not only do they turn blue or another color or not, but do they do it rapidly, and how deep and dark. And as you can see, I've just been holding this here for, I don't know, maybe 15-20 seconds, and we're really have changed colors altogether. And the reason that I scooped this one up is it's like, oh, it's yellow, and yellow with blue racing, oxidization reactions is something that I always really enjoy when I'm looking at mushrooms. And I just got a nice little cloud that really also accentuates the color contrast here. Oh, that's very nice. Okay, so I want to talk to you. I'm pretty confident that was nothing to worry about, but I'm always very mindful that what I'm doing might look a little weird. So all right, so I want to talk to you briefly about Boletus separans. This is kind of a new one for me, but this is a good edible mushroom, and I would consider this in the sort of porcini category. I'm going to take this home and more than likely do some dehydration with it. But what you have is a mushroom that has, and let me get where did I put the big daddy? Oh, okay, here's the biggest specimen of this this particular mushroom. So they do look, boletes have a tendency to kind of vary in their appearance, but these were growing like almost conjoined. So I'm pretty confident that the same thing. But what you have going on here is, a mushroom that has a really, now the more that I handle this, the more I'm like, maybe they are different. But anyway, in the case of this thing right here, which I am really good and confident is Boletus separans, you have a nice thick porous layer underneath. And in the case of Boletus separans, that's described as, the pores are described as stuffed. And what that is in reference to is there's a lot of boletes where the holes are really distinctive, and I will show you one. So here's one where you can see the pores and holes in it really distinctively. By way of comparison, Boletus separans, it looks really kind of flush, and so it is a sponge, but it doesn't have the kind of holy appearance. In addition to that, you have some reticulation going on. That is not always the case with this mushroom, and sort of a purpley, described as liverish color on the cap, sometimes to brown, and then also on the stem here. So the thing that I'm digging about this particular collection as well is that it shows off a feature for identification that's really helpful with this species, which is the The sponge surface starts out white and then it turns yellow, but it's not sort of a olivey color. So a lot of boletes, they start out, whitish when they're very young. You get the sponge turns a yellowy color and then sort of a yellow olive, and olive is the color of the spore print, so you get these olive tones emerge. In the case of Boletus separans, you have a yellow, like truly yellow surface, even with the mature mushrooms. And these are just, delightful. I'm, again, not very familiar. I'm going to do some more research, but I wanted to share them with you. And then finally, last but certainly not least, I want to talk to you about, very briefly, Aureoboletus betula, the shaggy-stalked bolete. So this is one of our sort of iconic, really good to eat summer bolete type mushrooms in the North Carolina Piedmont. So you see them growing, abundantly in these areas, like little oak groves and stuff like that. And you have, again, a cap and stem mushroom that has the this porous undersurface. But in the case of Aureoboletus betula, or the shaggy-stalked bolete, is really a bright lemony yellow. As it matures, it kind of turns a little, more like a little on the greenish side. But anyway, it is a brighter yellow than a lot of the yellows that you see on other boletes. Additionally, you have a mushroom that is in all respects really nice and tall and sort of small in diameter relative to other mushrooms. So to give you a sense, like this Boletus separans is sort of like, it looks a lot like a classic porcini mushroom, Boletus edulis. And so, when you talk to people about boletes, oftentimes this is really the image they have in their mind. Aureoboletus betula is really tall, slender, and kind of, tends to have a small cap, relatively speaking. The thing that makes this mushroom super identifiable and really good for novices who are interested in foraging is it does have these really distinctive sort of yellow scabs and shagginess on the stem, and underneath is sort of a reddish color. These are, they're a little bit ooey on the inside, but you have sort of a, very light yellow to whitish and also like a little bit of a layer where you can see it's sort of a dark cherry red here. So you have, and again, in these, the difference between like the yellow on top and then it being red underneath isn't quite as distinct, but sometimes it's like a lot of interlocking yellow shags that you can easily scrape off, and then there's this sort of dark reddish thing underneath. Last thing that makes this mushroom super identifiable is that it comes up with a big old chunk of white mycelium at the base. That just, like, if you pick this mushroom, it'll come up with a big old pile of it. And a lot of mushrooms, either their mycelium is the same color as the fruiting body, or when you pick them, that separation, of like picking the mushroom, the mycelium, you won't necessarily get a whole lot of it. And also, okay, so I'm going to conclude here, but I did start by saying I think this is Boletus separans, and now I'm pretty sure that this has got to be a Tylopilus, and that it just happened to be like growing right on top of this Boletus separans, because this is starting to stain. It's got different coloration, no reticulation. Anyway, I have to go and hit my books, but TLDR, I can't believe I'm TLDRing you after an 18-minute video, but here we go. Amanita section Caesareae is a wonderful mushroom to find lots of opportunity also for learning the depths and detail of how new species are being researched and defined, and what features are significant for making those delineations, and whether or not you can do a field identification without additional research. That's always something that it becomes clear when, enough information is available at a sort of genetic level, like can you tell the difference between these things just by looking at them. So that's a really fruitful area, and also delicious and delightful mushrooms to find and eat alongside these Boletus separans. And this Tylopilus is edible if not bitter. I should have done that to begin with. Woo! Yeah, that is bitter. Okay, so this is a Tylopilus mushroom, and you know, they oftentimes also have lilac colors, but many of them are like, you know, if not bitter, they're okay to eat, but most of them are bitter. So we have a really good example of like, these were almost conjoined at the base, but you know, are different species, because I've nibbled this one. It's very as mild and mushroomy and delightful as can be. I hope you have a great mushroom season. I sure am, as you can tell. Don't get busted making mushroom videos. It's not worth it. I have no idea if it's worth it or not. I will report back, but I remain unscathed for this episode. See you next time.